detailed we can, but one of the ways that we do manage groundwater is we permit non-exempt wells, and we do that through a variety of methods. We also have an observation well system that has 1,400 wells. We measure those annually and at the same time every year, and we use those water levels to determine whether we are meeting our goals as far as having 50% of the water in storage in 50 years. So I think that answers the basic question, and we can certainly, as you guys please, get in more depth with our rules. So I think I'll stop there for now.
Let me interrupt for a second. A lot of the SEJ members that are here are from other parts of the country, and they don't understand Texas' unique water laws. Can you explain to them about the right of capture and what it is?
I can explain to you briefly. I think we have a presenter coming this afternoon that's going to do that a little bit better. I will tell you.
Well, that in relation to why groundwater districts have to come in.
Okay, Texas, give me a minute just to make sure I say this articulately. Surface water in the state of Texas is basically owned by the state of Texas. Groundwater is owned by the landowners. It is not. It's not governed by the public entities, except to the extent that groundwater conservation districts were formed about 60 years ago because the state of Texas did want to treat groundwater like they do surface water. They wanted to manage it in the same method, which is more of an allocation method. What we have is a right to capture. Basically what that says is if I own 10 acres of land, I can put a well on that and I can pump as much water as I can capture, and once it comes to the surface, it is mine to do what I want with, except I can't waste it. And there are definitions both in the state and our rules for what waste is. So essentially, and that's a little different than oil and gas, because if I do that under oil and gas law, when I take Kristen's oil, I have to pay her for it. Under groundwater law, you don't have to do that, provided you are not wasting the water. You own it when you capture it. That does not mean you can go on somebody else's property and start pumping water and own it and capture it, because you still have to be, I mean, they have to allow you on their property. So that's how groundwater is managed here. Years ago, or 60 years ago, a group of producers in this area, actually, state of Texas is quite huge, but it was producers in this area who went down and took their argument down to Austin, and that's when the Groundwater Conservation District Act was formed, and that's how our water district actually got formed, is they wanted a more localized government or regulation of the aquifer. So what that does is there's nobody in Austin that can come tell us what to do with our water. Our board of directors, that's the reason our board of directors being elected by the eligible voters within our jurisdiction are so important, is because they represent the producers, the voters here inside our 16 counties. Now, of course, anytime you start affecting people's personal use of their personal property, that becomes a challenge, and we're under that as we speak now. We've always permitted wells according to spacing from other wells. Recently, we added production limits. Well, we've got producers who think that we are now limiting their pleasurable use of their groundwater, and so we have to walk the fine line, like I was saying in the beginning, of not harming them, but also by making sure that the production of groundwater in our region is responsible, and that we do have a long-term water supply, and 50 years is the horizon that our board chose.
Okay, that's a good answer.
I'll be an attorney next time.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Charlene Lurig. I'm with Ceres. We are a Boston-based national network of institutional investors. So we represent a network of about 100 investors with 10 trillion in assets under management, all combined, and these are very long-term investors, life insurance companies, pension plans that are investing for beneficiaries that might not draw down on those benefits for 60-some years. So over that lifetime, water scarcity is very much a mainstream financial issue. I work with credit rating agencies. I work with bond buyers who are buying the debt that finances our water systems to understand how supply and demand challenges are changing and what implication that's going to have on the value of the bonds that they buy today. And what I'll say is, usually when I'm asked to speak on how we finance water solutions for urban or municipal users. And I'll say, while there are many, many challenges to financing toward a more sustainable water future, especially if you look at the 80% of water that's used by agricultural users, what we have when we look on the municipal water side is not a financing problem, any more than it's a financing problem if I want to buy a 5,000 square foot house and I want to do it with 0% down and I want to have a 0% interest rate. That's not really a financing problem, that's a problem of expectations. And I would say that's the problem that most cities and hopeful cities that are now small communities are running into, which is especially in the West, that water use patterns, our expectations of how much we pay for water and what we use it for, developed within an environment in which water users were paying the lowest prices for water in the entire US, even though they were drawing on some of the scarcest resources, because the water users weren't the ones who built or paid for the infrastructure projects that delivered their water. It was the federal government that paid for those projects, and the US taxpayer that paid for those projects. And the economics today of supplying new water that will have to be built by and paid for by the rate base within those areas, because the era of federal largesse has passed. There are many, many efforts underway to try to get states to assume the role that the federal government once assumed in building those water resources, but many of those are not really going anywhere fast. That economic reality of escalating cost of water supplies is coming up against a reality of declining water demand, which very few people recognize or understand. So if you go to Texas, if you go to Nevada, if you go to Arizona, the assumption is that as the population grows, demand for water in those cities will grow with it. And that is an assumption that has not played out in reality over the past 30 or 40 years. Water use has remained flat in many areas. The amount of water that the typical household uses has been declining. In some areas has declined quite precipitously. And that is a very important thing for us to recognize when we're looking at developing water projects that are the most expensive water projects we've ever thought about building. So the city of Las Vegas, the Southern Nevada Water Authority, is looking at building a groundwater importation project that would deliver water and be a substitute for the water they use from the Colorado River right now. When all is said and done, when that project is actually financed, that's going to be about a $16 billion project that will be built on the backs of the households and the businesses in Southern Nevada. And it's a very compelling question about whether or not they can afford that. But an equally compelling question is, what are our incentives to exercise demand management, to actually get us to a point where we're using water efficiently if you're paying for a project that is that expensive? And this is a very real challenge that many water systems are facing today. They're seeing demand declining within their service area. They don't know why it's declining. They never expected it to decline as much as it has, even if they invested over time in conservation programs, in low-flow toilets and the rest of it. And there are a number of reasons why it's happening. We have more water-efficient appliances. We actually have prices that are starting to communicate to the consumer the actual cost of using that extra $1,000 or 1,000 gallons of water to water a lawn. And that's shifting people's use of water. But 80% of the money that water systems take in depends on how much water you and I buy. And yet they have fixed costs for paying for the pipelines they build, the reservoirs they build, and the rest of it. And when the amount of money coming in from water sales starts to get too close to that fixed amount that they have to pay out the door to investors, they start to take measures to make sure that that decline doesn't continue. And so you see in Southern Nevada, you see Las Vegas now having once paid people to rip up the lawn that was requiring all that water, they're now allowing them to put the lawn back in very quietly because they need that money. It's a governance problem because the amount we pay for water actually is mostly determined by city councils. It's determined by elected representatives. And so when the story that people see when they read their newspapers are the cost of water is going up, you need to show up to a rate hearing and contest that, that's the story that they take away. But we're kind of at a decision point right now, where either we can kind of double down on supply, we can build expensive supply